Happy anniversary. There's something I need to tell you. My husband said those words while holding my hand across the table at the same restaurant we had gone to every single year for 14 years. Same corner booth, same candle, same waiter who always brought us the same bottle of red without asking. And then, before he could say one more word, his phone lit up, face up. Right there on the white tablecloth, between our two plates. Happy anniversary to us too. I didn't move. I didn't pull my hand away. I didn't gasp, and I didn't cry. I just looked at him, calm as still water, and said one sentence. Keep going. Tell me the something. He blinked. I don't think that was the reaction he had planned for. Maybe he expected me to cry. Maybe he expected me to run to the bathroom, or throw my napkin down and storm out so the whole restaurant would turn and stare. Maybe some small, arrogant part of him even expected me to beg him not to say it. Instead, I sat there, hand still in his, and waited. He thought the hardest part of that night was going to be his confession. He had no idea I'd already known for 3 weeks. And he had no idea that the person who told me wasn't a stranger. It was someone who had eaten dinner at our house more times than I could count. Someone who had held my hand at my mother's funeral. Someone I called my sister, even though we didn't share a drop of blood. By the end of that night, 2 people I trusted more than almost anyone on this earth were going to lose me completely. And neither of them saw it coming, because they still believed I was the same woman who used to give people the benefit of the doubt. I wasn't her anymore. Not after 3 weeks of watching and waiting and quietly building something neither of them knew existed. Stay with me, because this story isn't really about a cheating husband. Those stories are everywhere. This one is about what happens when the betrayal has 2 names on it, and only one of them is expecting to get caught. To understand how deep this cut, you need to understand what 14 years actually looked like. I met him when I was 23. I was working my first real job at a small marketing firm in the city I grew up in, a city I loved, with a career that was just starting to take off. He was 5 years older, already climbing fast in his company. Confident in that easy way some men are when things have simply gone right for them their whole lives. He didn't chase me hard. He was patient. He asked good questions and actually listened to the answers. On our 3rd date, he remembered that I took my coffee with oat milk before oat milk was something every coffee shop carried. Small things like that made me feel seen. A year and a half later, his company offered him a promotion. The catch was, it meant moving 3 states away to a city where I knew no one and where my career would essentially have to start over from zero. I said yes. I told myself it was what love looked like: flexibility, sacrifice, betting on someone. I left behind a job I had worked hard for, a circle of friends I had built since college, and a city that had always felt like mine. I told myself the new city would become mine too eventually, and for a long time it did. We got married 2 years after the move. We built a house with a porch swing he installed badly, and then redid twice until it stopped wobbling, a dog that only ever obeyed me, and eventually, a son. I want to tell you about one night, because I need you to understand that this wasn't always a cold marriage. This wasn't a story where the warning signs had been flashing red for a decade and I simply refused to see them. There was real warmth here, real partnership. It was our 5th anniversary. We couldn't afford a big trip that year, so instead, he set up a blanket in our backyard. String lights hung crookedly between 2 trees and a playlist of songs from our first year together. We lay there for hours, just talking, the way you do when you still feel like you're getting to know someone even after years together. At one point he turned to me and said, "I don't know what I did to deserve someone who bet on me like you did." I believed him. Every word. I'm telling you this because betrayal doesn't erase the good years. It just makes you question whether they were ever real, which, if you've been through something like this, you already know is its own particular kind of pain. There's one more detail from around that time that matters. My best friend Dana had moved to our city about a year after we did, chasing a job opportunity of her own. She quickly became my person here, the friend I called first with good news and bad news alike. I used to joke that she was the sister I never had since I'd grown up an only child. At my mother's funeral, when I couldn't speak, Dana stood beside me and held my hand through the entire service. I trusted her the way you trust family. Maybe more, because family you're born into. Dana, I chose. Keep her in your mind, because everything that happens next runs straight through her. 3 weeks before that anniversary dinner, my life quietly split into a before and an after. It started small, the way these things almost always do. I was standing behind my husband one evening while he checked something on his laptop, and an email notification slid down from the top corner of the screen. It was from a hotel loyalty program, the kind that sends you a thanks for your recent stay message with a little survey attached. I hadn't stayed at any hotel recently. Neither of us had traveled anywhere in months. I didn't say anything. I just filed it away. A few days later, I was going through our joint credit card statement to plan out the month's budget. Something I did every few weeks without either of us thinking twice about it. There was a charge for $340 at a boutique clothing store, one I had never heard of, in a part of town neither of us had any reason to visit. When I asked him about it, almost casually, he said it was a gift for his sister's birthday. His sister's birthday was 4 months away. Then came the gym schedule. For years, he'd gone to the same gym near his office every Tuesday and Thursday evening, always home by 7:30. Suddenly, without explanation, Tuesday became an early Monday session instead. Thursday became maybe Friday, depends on the week. Small shifts, the kind of shifts a person makes when they're rearranging their life around someone else's schedule, not their own. I want to be honest with you about something. I did not confront him after any single one of these moments. I know some of you watching this might be frustrated by that. You might be yelling at your screen right now saying, why didn't she just ask him directly? Here's why. I had learned, painfully over the years, that when you accuse someone of something with only a feeling and no proof, they get to control the story. They get to call you paranoid, insecure, dramatic. They get to make you apologize for even asking. I wasn't going to hand him that kind of power over my own instincts. Not again. So instead, I watched. I paid closer attention to which nights he showered as soon as he got home, before dinner, when for years he'd always showered after. I paid attention to how he started keeping his phone face down on tables, a habit he'd never had before. I paid attention to the fact that he started taking calls from the car, in the driveway, instead of walking straight into the house. None of it was a smoking gun on its own. But together, it painted a picture I didn't want to look at directly, but couldn't stop seeing out of the corner of my eye. There was a night, about 2 weeks in, when I sat on the edge of our bed after he'd fallen asleep, just looking at him, trying to find the man who used to remember my coffee order on a third date. I remember thinking, maybe I'm building a story out of nothing. Married 14 years, you learn things about a person that don't mean what they'd mean early on. You learn to give the benefit of the doubt. So I gave him 3 more weeks of it. I told myself that if I was wrong, no harm done. Nobody would ever know I doubted him at all. And if I was right, I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with before I said a single word out loud. Because once you say it out loud, you can't take it back, and neither can the people you say it to. What I didn't know yet, sitting there in the dark, is that the answer wasn't going to come from a receipt or a hotel email at all. It was going to come from Dana. About 10 days before the anniversary dinner, I finally did what any woman in my position would eventually do. I called my best friend. We met for coffee on a Saturday morning at the little cafe we'd been going to for years. The one with the corner table by the window that we half joked was ours. I told her everything: the hotel email, the strange charge, the shifting gym schedule, the phone habits. I watched her face carefully as I spoke, half expecting outrage on my behalf. The kind of righteous anger a best friend is supposed to bring to a moment like that. Instead, I got a pause that lasted maybe 2 seconds too long. "Maybe you're overthinking it," she said, not quite meeting my eyes, stirring her coffee even though she'd already finished stirring it. I know that voice. I have known that voice for almost 15 years. It's the same careful, over-controlled voice she used the year she was hiding a surprise 40th birthday party for me, the voice of someone holding something back on purpose. Except this time, there was no surprise party waiting on the other side of it. I let it go that day. I told myself I was reading too much into a pause, into a tone, into a woman who was simply trying to calm her anxious best friend down. But something in my gut had shifted, quietly, from suspicion about my husband to a second, smaller, sharper suspicion about her. 2 days later, I found the first real thread. I was using an old shared laptop we kept in the kitchen for grocery lists and calendar reminders, a computer both my husband and I had used for years. One that still had some of our accounts logged in from way back. I wasn't looking for anything. I was trying to add a dentist appointment to our shared family calendar. Instead, I found an old calendar invite still sitting in the account from months earlier for a dinner reservation. 3 names on the guest list. My husband's, a restaurant I didn't recognize, and Dana's. My stomach dropped in a way I can only describe as physical. Not emotional first, physical first, and the emotional part caught up half a second later. I didn't stop there. Once you start looking, you can't unsee the search bar in front of you. I found a text thread between them from the same laptop, synced from an old phone backup neither of them had thought to clear. Most of it was mundane logistics, scheduling, the kind of texts that could belong to 2 people coordinating a surprise anniversary gift if I wanted to believe the most generous version. But one message stopped me, cold. My husband had written, "Don't tell her yet, she'll ask too many questions." Dana had responded with a single word, obviously not tell her about what, not questions about what. Just, obviously, like it was understood between them exactly what needed to be hidden, and exactly who the her was who was supposed to stay in the dark. There was one more piece, and this one hurt the most, because it was so small and so easy to overlook if I hadn't already been looking. A photo Dana had posted months earlier, one I'd scrolled past at the time without a second thought, showing her at a work conference out of town. In the far background of that photo, blurred but unmistakable if you knew what you were looking for, was a restaurant sign. The same restaurant from the calendar invite, the one in our own city, the one she had claimed she'd never even heard of when I'd mentioned it to her once in passing. She hadn't been out of town at all. Or if she had, she'd made time to come back for that dinner. I sat with all of this for 2 full days before I said anything to anyone. I want you to understand what that felt like, carrying proof of 2 betrayals at once, from 2 different people, and still having to sit across from both of them like nothing had changed. I still went to Dana's for a wine night that week. I still let my husband kiss me goodbye in the mornings. I smiled. I asked about their days. I became, without any training for it, an excellent actress. Because here is what I understood clearly. In those 2 days, if I confronted either of them too early, with the truth only half assembled, they would close ranks. They would coordinate their stories. They would decide together what version of events I was allowed to know. I wasn't going to let 2 people who had already lied to me for months get one more chance to lie to me together. So I kept watching. I kept collecting. And quietly, without telling either of them, I made one phone call that changed everything, a call to a lawyer, just to understand my options. Just to know where I actually stood if this was as bad as it looked. It was worse. Word travels strange paths in a tight circle of friends and family, even when you think you've been careful. About a week before the anniversary, I noticed something new. My husband started being unusually attentive, bringing home flowers for no occasion, suggesting we book that anniversary dinner reservation somewhere special this year. complimenting me in ways that felt rehearsed rather than natural. At the time, I told myself maybe guilt had shaken something loose in him, some late instinct to be a better husband. Now I understand it differently. I think somewhere in that week, he had decided he needed to tell me himself, on his own terms, in a setting where he controlled the mood candlelight, a nice restaurant, my hand in his. I think he wanted to be the one holding the narrative, the sympathetic man brave enough to confess, rather than the man who got caught. What he didn't know was that Dana had already, in her own clumsy way, tried to get ahead of things too. She called me 4 days before the dinner, her voice tight in a way I'd never heard from her before. She said she'd been thinking a lot about our friendship and wanted to make sure no misunderstanding ever came between us, especially with everything going on in your marriage lately. It was a strange, circling kind of call, nothing specific admitted, nothing specific denied, just a woman trying to inoculate herself in advance against something she suspected was coming. I played along. I told her I appreciated her, that our friendship meant everything to me. Every word of that last part was true. Once, that's what made it so easy to say convincingly, and so painful to say at all. 2 days before the dinner, my husband made a move I hadn't expected. I noticed a transfer out of one of our joint savings accounts, not a huge amount, but enough to notice. Moved into an account I didn't recognize. When I asked him about it, gently, framing it as simple curiosity about our finances, he brushed it off as just consolidating some things for the new year. Don't worry about it. I did worry about it. I worried about it enough to already be sitting, by that point, in a lawyer's office of my own, going over exactly what consolidating could mean for someone in his position, and exactly what protections I had if he tried to make more moves like that before I was ready. That same evening, in a moment I still find hard to fully explain, he sat me down on the couch, took both my hands, and said, "I just want you to know, whatever happens, I love you, and I love our family. Let's not do anything we'll regret." I remember looking at him and thinking, he doesn't know that I'm the one who has already been deciding, quietly for weeks now, what I'm and am not willing to regret. He thought he was the one steering this. He thought he was managing a wife who might be starting to suspect something vague and unconfirmed. He had no idea he was managing a woman who already had a calendar invite, a text thread, a photo, a bank transfer, and a lawyer. I said, softly, I don't want to do anything we'll regret either. And I meant every word of that sentence, just not in the way he thought I did. Here is the part of this story I think about the most, because it's the part where everything quietly shifted in my favor, long before he ever said a single word across that dinner table. 2 days before our 14th anniversary, I sat across from a lawyer of my own, a woman recommended to me by a former coworker, someone with no connection to my husband's world at all. I laid out everything. The hotel email, the boutique charge, the gym schedule, the calendar invite, the text thread, the photo, the bank transfer. She listened without a single flicker of surprise, the way people do when they've heard hundreds of versions of the exact same story before. She helped me understand, calmly and clearly, exactly what documentation I needed, exactly what accounts I had rights to, and exactly what steps to take before announcing anything to anyone. I moved my share of certain joint funds into an account solely in my name, not to hide money, but simply to make sure no one else could quietly move it first. I gathered copies of financial statements. I saved screenshots of that text thread and that calendar invite somewhere neither he nor Dana could ever access or delete. And then there was the phone. The same phone I used to plan every detail of that anniversary dinner, the reservation, the restaurant, even the outfit I picked out that morning, texted to Dana for her opinion. Not knowing yet what I now knew about her, that same phone sat on the table between us that night, screen down, recording. I want to be clear about why. It wasn't some dramatic decision made in the heat of the moment. I had decided days earlier that if my husband was finally going to tell me the something, I wanted a record of exactly what he said, in his own words. with no room later for him to soften it, recast it, or claim I'd misunderstood. I had learned enough about how these situations unfold to know that memory gets rewritten by the people who did the wrong thing. I wasn't going to let that happen to mine. So when his phone lit up that night with happy anniversary to us two, I wasn't just a shocked wife freezing at a dinner table. I was a woman who had already built her exit, quietly, brick by brick. Over 3 weeks a lawyer, a protected account, documented proof, and now a recording of the confession itself happening in real time. I hadn't just been listening that night. I had been recording on the same phone I'd used to plan this entire dinner. And he still had no idea. "Keep going," I said again after that phone lit up between us. "Tell me the something." He looked down at the screen, then back up at me, and for a moment I watched something in his face try to decide between two versions of himself, the man who wanted to keep lying, and the man who'd apparently decided tonight was the night for a confession. He chose confession, though I now understand it was less about honesty and more about control. He wanted to be the one who told me, before I could ever prove I already knew. He said her name, Dana's name. He said it had just happened, that it had gotten complicated, that he never meant to hurt me. He reached for my hand again as he said it, and I let him take it because I wanted him finished. Completely finished, before I said a single word of what I knew. When he was done, I asked him to call Dana. Right then. To come meet us, since apparently the three of us have a lot to talk about. I watched the color leave his face. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected tears, or anger, or a scene he could manage and apologize his way through. He hadn't expected me to invite the second betrayer directly into the room. Dana arrived 20 minutes later, visibly shaking, clearly having been told only that she knows, we need to talk to her together. She sat down across from us both, and I let the silence stretch just long enough for it to become uncomfortable for everyone but me. Then I spoke, plainly, without raising my voice. "I know about the hotel. I know about the boutique charge. I know about the gym schedule that stopped making sense 3 weeks ago. I know about the dinner reservation with both your names on it. I know about the text where you told him not to tell me yet because I'd asked too many questions. And I know about the photo, Dana, the one where you said you were out of town, standing in front of a restaurant 3 blocks from my house. Neither of them said a word. My husband's mouth opened slightly, then closed again, the way a person's does when they realize the story they'd rehearsed no longer applies to the situation in front of them. I turned my phone around and set it on the table, screen facing up, the recording app still visibly running, the timer quietly climbing. "And I have all of it documented," I said. "Every message, every photo, every transfer you tried to make 2 days ago. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I moved my share of our accounts before you could move yours. This isn't the beginning of a conversation where you get to convince me of anything. This is the end of one." Dana started crying first, apologizing in broken half-sentences about how she never meant for it to go this far, how she hated herself every single day. My husband, to his credit, or perhaps just from finally running out of options, didn't try to argue with the facts. He just sat there, hands folded, looking suddenly much smaller than the man who'd held my hand across that table 20 minutes earlier. I didn't yell. I didn't cry in front of them, though I promise you, I cried plenty later, alone, in the privacy of my own car. I simply stood up, picked up my phone, and said the only thing left worth saying. You both had months to tell me the truth yourselves. Instead, you let me find it. That tells me everything I need to know about who you both really are. And I walked out of that restaurant alone on what would have been our 14th anniversary, feeling something I hadn't expected to feel that night at all. Not devastation. Relief. It has been several months since that dinner. I won't pretend the months right after were easy, because they weren't. There were nights I sat in a new apartment, smaller than the house I'd left behind, wondering if I'd made the right decision, wondering if 14 years could really end over the choices of 2 people who claimed to love me. But I want to tell you clearly, every single time that doubt crept in, I reminded myself of one simple fact. I didn't end that marriage. Their choices did. I just refused to keep living inside a lie once I finally had the truth in my hands. My son and I moved into that new apartment together, and slowly, it started to feel like ours. I hung the same string lights we'd once had in our old backyard, on my new little balcony, because some things you're allowed to keep even after everything else changes. My career, the one I gave up all those years ago when we first moved for his job, has quietly come back to life. I took on freelance work at first, then a full position at a company that actually values the skills I'd let go rusty for over a decade. There's something almost funny about it now. The sacrifice I made for a marriage that didn't survive turned out to be the very thing I rebuilt myself with, once I had no choice but to start over. My relationship with my son has never been stronger. He's a teenager now, old enough to understand more than I originally wanted him to, and I made a choice early on to be honest with him in an age-appropriate way, rather than let him fill in the blanks with something worse than the truth. He told me once, a few weeks after the divorce filing, that he was proud of how calm I stayed. That single sentence from him meant more to me than almost anything else that happened that whole year. As for Dana, I haven't spoken to her since that night. I've heard, through people who still move in both our old circles, that she tried reaching out to a few of our shared friends afterward, hoping to keep some of them loyal to her side of the story. It didn't work the way she hoped. People who truly knew both of us understood exactly what had happened and exactly who had lied. My ex-husband and I are civil now, mostly for our son's sake, in the careful, business-like way two people manage things when trust has been permanently removed from the relationship. That's all it is anymore, and honestly, that's all it needs to be. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this. Trust your instincts, even when they whisper instead of shout. That quiet feeling in your gut. The one you talk yourself out of because you don't have proof yet protect it. Watch quietly if you have to. Build your own foundation before you say a single word out loud. Because the moment you speak the truth, you lose the element of surprise, and the people who wronged you will use every second they have left to control the story. I didn't get revenge that night by yelling or crying or making a scene in front of strangers at a nice restaurant. I got it by being ready, long before either of them expected me to be. If you're watching this, tell me where in the world you are right now. I read every single comment. And if any part of this story felt familiar to you, in ways you didn't expect, I hope it reminded you of something important. You're allowed to protect yourself quietly, for as long as you need to, before you ever have to say a word.